Thank you. Good evening, folks.
Hello.
Good evening.
Great to be back. We are going to provide you an update on not necessarily all things facilities, but facilities, and spend a little bit of time on Thurgood, following up on our presentation a month ago. No. We've eradicated that from our.
Mrs. Durang,
right.
we have not.
We're using the. Adam Thurgood would not appreciate that.
He would not.
So we're going to break this up into.
He ain't Norfolk, you know.
Into three main components. We're going to talk a little bit about cost, a little bit about design, and then a little bit about process and our use of design charrettes. Okay. So first, costs. Give you some historical perspective, and I've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to move through this as quickly as I can. I think it'd be good if you guys could hold questions to the end. I appreciate it, so I can move through this, and we'll spend as much time as you want at the end. I've been talking to y'all for a couple of months about current trends and things we're seeing, so we're going to share some data with you about some trends, and then I'm going to talk about a term called value engineering and things that we've been doing in our office that I don't think too many of y'all know about. Okay. All right, Kellam High School. Okay, and this is probably the least square school, not probably, it's definitely the least square school in this school division. Okay, and this school is the design of this school is a product of exactly what we have been through with PA Middle and Thurgood, visioning, educational programming, design charrettes, and the folks that were involved in this would tell you that we worked our way down from 4, 5, 6 different types of plans, and what you see here and what ultimately got built was a product of that process. Okay, and so the costs you see are, and I want to distinguish between this because this is where when people talk about cost information, things get mixed up. Okay, there are really. There's one cost number that most people use that's recognized by the Commonwealth and recognized in our industry, the cost per square foot of the building and the site, okay? And so when you hear me talk about Kellam was a $210 or $15 a square foot building, I'm talking about the building and the site, and usually that excludes cost of work out in the right-of-way and turn lanes and things like that, but it's the construction cost, okay? For this purpose, the state also breaks out the cost per square foot of the building, right? And so since we've been talking about building shapes, I felt like it would be good to share with you the actual cost of Kellam High School, the construction cost, right? And so what you see is that Kellam High School, which was the only high school bid in the Commonwealth in 2011 and 12, the actual cost of the building was about $168 a square foot, okay? That is, as you can see, a little less expensive than the average of the 8 high schools that were bid before it, okay? So if you look at 8, 9, there were 5 schools that were bid about $172 a foot, 0 and 9, 10, and 10, 11, there were 3, okay? And so, you know, the average of those is about $170 a square foot, give or take.
Why does it say 2 I'm confused.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
right.
never mind, okay.
5,
yep, okay.
shouldn't touch that. 3
I
there.
got it, I was looking
so
at
the average of those 8.
I got it, yeah.
All right, and so Kellam, you know, on the order of about $168 a square foot. Okay, so actually a little less than the 8 previous high schools that were bid in the Commonwealth. All right. You know, we've talked a fair amount about the cost of curvilinear around, and so we went back to the design team, to Mike Ross and at HBA and the structural engineers at Kellam, and said, you know, what was the difference? What's the delta for a building like Kellam? Now, be mindful that that curvilinear buildings like Kellam were actually built with rectangular parts, and I'll show you later in this presentation what I'm talking about. But they went through and they evaluated, what did it cost to build a building like this, curvilinear, okay? And 0.25%, all right, 1/4%, okay, is the delta for a building that's curvilinear like this. And that's of the cost per square foot, okay? So the cost of the building itself is on the order of about $59 million. Not site, just the physical building itself, okay? So we went back to the design team, so about 0.25%, okay? Now, I'm not saying that's not real money, all right? But in the grand scheme of things, for a building like this, that's flexible, and I'll talk about what we see as the upside of building a non-rectangular building in a second. Okay, some current trends. Engineering News Record, ENR, is probably the most well-known engineering publication in the United States. And so I'll share with you just some data from ENR and then the Turner Building Cost Index. 2017 fourth quarter construction cost index compared to fourth quarter 2015, about 7.25%. That's the CCI. So Turner does work all over the world. Turner is a well-recognized contractor, and so they have their own construction cost index that a lot of our guys use locally. So Turner, over a similar time period, third quarter 17 from third quarter 15, almost 10%. All right, what we are seeing in our marketplace is the construction cost index. The inflation has been going up for the past couple of years on the order of between 4 and 5%, and we think that trend is going to continue. Okay, just a couple material costs. Copper has been up 60% cost of material in the past year, and over the same time frame, aluminum a little bit more than 50%. Okay, I've also talked to you about the impact that natural disasters have on our industry, and so there was an article written late this summer, a guy named Tim Grogan, who's a construction writer, and so I'll read it to you. Harvey's aftermath will rattle construction supply chain economists say. Hurricane Harvey's immediate impact on the construction sector will be a disruption in the supply chain for key materials. As the cleanup and eventual rebuilding proceed, increased demand for materials and labor will push costs upwards. Based on our experience with Katrina and Sandy, we know that the rebuilding requires several years to gear up, so we expected Harvey to have to influence construction starts during the 1819 timeframe. Okay? We will see the impacts of natural disasters in the material side of our business. We are already struggling on the labor side of our business. Anybody in our industry, and I don't care if it's a residential contractor, but definitely commercial contractors will tell you that in our industry there is a struggle to get competent, be it bricklayers, plumbers, electricians, you name it. All right? Just a fact. So we are going to feel this for some time. Okay. All right. Value engineering, and what does that mean? We have had in our organization a value engineering program for the better part of a decade and a half. Okay, and what we do on large projects, and when I say large projects, new capital construction projects like Thorogood, like Prince Sam Middle, like Old Donation School, like Kellum, at about 35% design, we bring in a separate design team, a different team of architects and engineers, structural engineers, mechanical engineers, land planners. We have the design team, in this case Thorogood Elementary School, spend Monday morning with this fresh set of eyeballs. We give them the plans and specs. The fundamental decisions are being made in terms of the size of the building, the shape of the building, the systems, the components. And we let them spend a week with our documents in a conference room. Okay? That's the best time to value engineer any project. After you bid it is not the best time. Okay? There are times where we've had to do that. All right? And so here are just 4 examples at Thorogood that came out of the value engineering effort that was done about 6 weeks ago. Okay, used traditional steel framing for the roof versus glue lam and wood. So the architect was considering the use of a lot of glue lam in Thorogood. If you've been in, a lot of churches have glue lam. If you go into the auditoriums at the old Kellam, Kempsville First Colonial Bayside, those are old glue lam beams. Okay, look nice, more expensive than traditional steel frame. Okay, that's savings on the order of $985,000. Reduce the size of the mechanical room. Use rooftop air handlers. Everybody wants all the mechanical equipment in a room inside the building, not on top of the roof. All right, extends the useful life of the equipment, easier to work on. All of it at Kellam, we've got the largest mechanical room we've ever built. Our maintenance guys love it. And in a perfect world, we do it for every building that we could. All right, Old Nation School, if you ride by, you'll see screens up on top of the roof, and you'll see mechanical equipment on top of the roof, okay? That's the traditional way of doing it, all right? But moving the equipment up on top of the roof saves, in terms of space and cost, about $135,000, all right? Reducing the curtain wall by using traditional metal stud frame. About $250,000, curtain wall, large spans of glass. That's one way to do it. You can use traditional metal stud framing and reduce the cost. Doesn't reduce the amount of natural light. It's just a less expensive way to do it. All right, and really a big one we've been doing for some time. You know, personally, I am a fan of terrazzo. Terrazzo will outlast the school building. Terrazzo is a 1,000-year material. Okay, it's expensive. It's an expensive floor finish. It's hard to put down. It's time-consuming. It's messy during construction. So 6 or 7 years ago, we started evaluating other floor finishes. If you go through Kellam, you'll see terrazzo in the common areas, and you'll see the use of linoleum in the academic wings. You'll see the same thing at the Old Nation School. Okay, and so here at Thorogood, we're going to do the same thing. You'll see in the public common areas, and you get out into the other parts of the building, you'll see a linoleum product. It's low maintenance. Before we did it, we brought the head custodian that was going to go to the new Kellam, and Larry Ames and his staff. We drove up to the Martha Jefferson Hospital in Charlottesville. It has the all sheet good product, rolled product, and it's very low maintenance. You see the guys riding the big machines. It requires no chemicals, and you just sweep it clean with a machine. So very low maintenance, no chemicals on top of it. And saves a tremendous amount of money. All right, we continually evaluate throughout the design process systems, materials, components, you know, all the way through before the job goes on the street. You know, one issue that came up, you saw a picture of a structural tree in the library media center. Okay, it's a structural tree. It's a $4,000 item, a steel column, all right, that would do the same thing, is roughly a $2,200 item. All right, so the net difference for that component is about $1,800. Okay, not that that's not real money. Okay, all right, but that's the difference. Okay, talk a little bit about design, the history of prototypes. We heard. We had some conversation about the use of prototypes in this division, talk about round and curvilinear, and then Dr. Zigarang and I are going to talk a little bit about design charrettes and what we did at Thorogood. Okay. This was an interesting exercise for us in our office. These are the 2 most commonly used prototypes in the division. They both happen to be elementary schools. The one on the left is Fairfield Elementary School that opened in 1976. It's what we call we call it the John Waller plan. Okay, John Waller is an architect with Wall Todd Sadler. He's a Southern gentleman. John is probably approaching his 9th decade. He doesn't practice architecture anymore, but he's done hundreds of school buildings we had 22 of those. I went to Brookwood, which was a John Waller prototype that we tore down, but we had 22. 22 of those were built in 17 years. 1961 to 1978. Plaza is the first one. Plaza didn't have a gym. Brookwood had a gym. All right, you see it, double-loaded corridor, gym on one side, admin cafeteria on the other. Very efficient plan. Back then, he didn't even erase the title block. All right, he flipped some of them over for growth and speed and economy, no doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, back then codes weren't changing; they weren't being redesigned. You had the same guys building them, so there is definitely some economy of scale when you were moving that quickly. Done for growth, done for speed. Christopher Farms to the right. This is what we call the Shriver and Holland plan. This building was designed in '95. It's kind of like a donut, rectangular in shape, double-loaded corridors. That's the 1997 version. All right, we built 14 of those in 12 years. Okay, 1997 to 2009. 4 of them for growth. All right, 10 of them as replacement schools. We tore Brookwood down as an example. Winter Oaks is another. All right, speed. Now also some economy. All right, they all have to be redesigned. In today's environment, you cannot take a set of plans with someone's seal on it, give it to another guy, and just change the title block. All right, codes change, systems change. Now there is economy in the folks who built it. We had a lot of the same trades that we were doing 2 and 3 a year. So there was economy in the construction and some small economy in the design side. All right, not as much as you would think. All right, but again, speed. All right, I'll move through these next ones. Independence Middle School, 1974. We did 4 in 5 years. 1969 to 1974. First Colonial High School on the right, 1966. There are 5 of those. It's a middle school plan. All right, the old Kellam, First Colonial, Kempsville Bayside, and Kempsville Middle, 1962 to 1969. Okay, speed. All right, I would not want to see us use the Christopher Farms single-story plan that was designed in 1995 on the Thorogood site. Okay? And I'll get into reasons why, aside from the fact that it's a single-story plan. It doesn't respect the site. The places where we used it, where speed was important, like the Windsor Woods, where you put it behind it, and the Windsor Oaks, where you put it next to it, and the New Towns, where you put it next to it, it makes sense. Okay? Going back into these school communities like Thorogood, and the site that I'll show you, from our professional perspective, it doesn't make sense. Okay. All right. Let's talk about round, curvilinear, and I'm going to show you some examples. Not all of them, but I'll show you some good examples of non-rectangular or square buildings. Obviously, Kellam High School that opened in 2014, Beach Middle School has a round element. College Park, 2-story, has a round element. I think very similar to the solution that you're seeing at Thorogood. The Old Donation School, it doesn't appear as much from a bird's eye view, but when you go in the building, you go in some of the rotunda areas, you'll see that obviously some round elements that opened in 2017. This one's interesting, the West Wing at Prince Anne High School. And it's made us think about why some buildings are round, okay, and the occupants. And so that building opened about 30 years ago when I came to work here. Actually, HBA, Bill Hargrove, designed it, okay. Tallwood High School has a round element in the courtyard. Speaking of prototypes, Tallwood High School, if you didn't know it, is Churchland High School, flipped over with a smaller gym, okay? Portsmouth's prototype school, okay? Okay, here's a cutout of a portion of Thurgood and the curvilinear part of the building. Okay, it's round in shape. It's built with rectangular components. Okay, and so it's a little more tricky to lay out, but again, it's built with square shapes, rectangular shapes. All right, there are a lot of upsides to having a building that has some curvilinear shape to it. All right, not all of Thurgood is curvilinear. If you go back into the two-story classroom wing, it's essentially rectangular. Okay, it improves circulation. All right, it improves the ability to allow natural light in. Believe it or not, it's more energy efficient. It's stronger. You think about wind. You don't see it. You won't find a square grain silo. Okay. People ask us all the time. You go into Kellam High School, which is a Category 2 hurricane shelter. All right, the commons area, the round part of that building, is designed to withstand a Category 2 hurricane. All right, there are elements of it that are round. Okay, the acoustics are better. I'm not going to. There's a lot of interesting information on the impact that round has on the brain versus rectangular, but I'm not that smart. I'm not going to get into it. But suffice to say, we've been doing it for a while. It's not new to this school division. We think it makes for a better building. We try not to get carried away with it. Okay, but we think that it does make for a better building if used properly. Okay. All right. I want to talk a little bit about design charrettes and how we have changed the way we program and design school buildings in this city compared to the way we used to do it 25 and 30 years ago, where they were done for growth. We didn't talk to anyone. I didn't say that we locked the door and there was a lamp on, but I will tell you, stakeholders, we talked to some C&I folks, but it was get fannies and chairs. We're behind infrastructure of trails growth, okay? We didn't have a built-in customer. We drew a school boundary around it. We gave them the keys, and we went and did the next one, all right? The way we do our work today is much different, much more time-consuming, but much better, all right? And we started this about 13 or 14 years ago, all right? We actually started it with some of the replacements, the elementary replacements where we went out to the staffs, not to the degree that we do it now, but starting with Renaissance, which started design and programming in 04, 05, Beach Middle, same time. For those of you who've been around, you remember the time we spent on Beach Middle related to the site acquisition. It got delayed for 3 years. A lot of community involvement. A lot of people not convinced that putting a 3-story building in a residential coastal community was a good idea. In fact, a lot of people would tell you it was a terrible idea. And that building, which has a round element and is 3 stories, fits in that coastal community like a glove. I think it's one of the best buildings we've ever done. Okay? Input from the community. All right? Winds Roach, Great Neck Middle, College Park, Kellam, ODS, most recently Dye, and now Thurgood and Prince Sam Middle School. So the process of bringing in, and 2 board members were involved in Prince Sam Middle School, bringing stakeholders in. Students are the most important, and at any level, okay? We've learned the most from our students. There's a reason that we don't have 2,000 lockers at Kellam High School. It's because of kids, okay? So bringing the stakeholders in and doing design charrettes, which takes time. You develop for your building, you develop stakeholders, the community buys in, teachers buy in, students buy in, and the product is better. Kellam High School, the old Donation School, were the product of a professionally facilitated effort by a talented design team with an owner who knows what they're doing, and empowering people to be involved and design and construct a better building. Okay? I'm going to ask Dr. Zigrein to talk a little bit about a similar process that we used with her staff, students, and community over at Thorogood. We've been at it for about 12 months. We've had close to 24 meetings. We're still at it. We're meeting with specialists and librarians and the clinic people. You know, so that's ongoing right now. So.
I'm glad there's some visuals up there so you can see some of the work that our staff and students were participating in. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you for a few minutes about the design process that we went through at Thorogood last year. As a school community, as I said, we had over 20 members of staff, students, and community members, civic league members, and we participated in these meetings approximately 2 or so a month throughout the year. And we started off with just our core values and things that made Thorogood Thorogood and things that were important to us as a school. And then throughout the process, we moved then into our space design and all the spaces that the school would have as a part of it. And then later in the year, of course, then in building design, where we talked about the flow of traffic, the educational needs, the just more procedural and practical things. So it was a year-long process, and you can see here in these pictures, these are where they were giving us kind of a plan, and then we were writing pluses and minuses, what we thought were positive, what needed to be moved. And with each time that the architectural firm came back, they provided us different experts if we had questions, and if we had any kind of input, they tweaked from time to time, and so that each time we could see that they had taken our input. And I think throughout the entire year, what the community and committee felt like that their input was valued and that they were really heard for the best interest of the children and the educational process. So that was really positive. Some of the individual things that I could think about that we provided input on is the teachers really thought it was important to have movable walls so that they could collaborate between classrooms with each other. The students really currently collaborate a lot, but the ease that that would create and the flexibility there. They also really wanted some multiple access points to the outdoor spaces. The gym location was something that we had decided to move. The students had a lot of input on that. They wanted it not too far just in case something happened, but they also didn't want it right in the middle where they thought it would be too noisy. So the students were amazing and had a lot of really good practical ideas that were taken into account and I think utilized. They also had some really innovative ideas. One of the things that they thought about that they thought, you know, could the walls in between classrooms, if they were glass, could they write on the walls as they collaborated with each other? So they had all kinds of great things to say. And again, not that every single idea could be used, but they certainly, their input was valued. What we really feel like happened by the end of the year when the rendering was given to us, we felt like not only would Thorogood be able to provide the best optimal learning environment for our students, but that it also really paid respect to the Thorogood community as a whole and would be an integral part of that legacy that we have in that neighborhood. So I think that it was a wonderful process that I had never taken a part of, and it was wonderful for the staff and the students and our community.
Thanks. You know, there's a sense sometimes that we get our customers. Cheryl's our customer. Okay, that we get our customer in the room, they get everything they want. All right. John Brewington wanted 2 auditoriums at Old Nation School, and he was serious. He was. He was not playing. Okay? He was advocating for his program. We couldn't afford 2 auditoriums. Okay? All right, so our job as professionals is to strike a balance, to listen. All right? I know our architect talked too much a month ago. I get it. Okay? I get it. She's a good listener. She's a good listener. She's very talented. and what I think ultimately what will get built will do exactly what Dr. Ziegering is talking about. Okay. Talk a little bit about the site, some constructability issues that relate to swing space, and then I'll wrap up because Carol's giving me the stink eye. Okay. You know, it doesn't hurt to remind ourselves that everything that we do that's funded out of the capital program has a capital project, all right, that gets presented as part of the superintendent's estimate of needs, that gets adopted by this board and goes over to council and ultimately gets approved by city council. Thorogood has been in the capital program, it was since 2004, 2005. I thought it was 7 or 8 years. I went back. All right, it's been in the capital program for the better part of 13 or 14 years. All right, it was initially in there as a modernization. All right, it's been in there as a replacement for almost a decade. Okay, so if you look back in 2008, 2009, you'll find it in there as a replacement project. You know, and so you know when we bring to you a capital program with projects, funding levels. You know, and you adopt and it goes over to council. You know, we do our best to live by that. Okay, that's not an easy thing to do when you're projecting out 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 years in any marketplace. Okay, we do it better than most. All right, we have modernized or replaced going on 34 buildings. All right, and I think. The pupil transportation facility, we came back and we said, you know, the bid market has changed, and but not very often, folks. All right, here is the site plan that that was developed by the Design Charrette Committee at Thorogood. All right, Thorogood is a heavily wooded site. Okay, it's an environmentally sensitive site. All right, the healthy stand of trees on this piece of property, I would say, are probably the most single important thing that came out of the Design Charrettes for everybody, neighbors, kids, staff. All right, you know, there are, for those of you, the existing building sits here. It just worked out that way. All right, we planned it with the idea that swing space is available. Okay, there's a healthy stand of trees between the existing building and the ball fields, and then you've got all these trees back here. All right. You know, so the Design Charrette process worked hard to respect the site. All right, it makes sense for this building to be a 2-story building. Okay, and so what we've done is to be respectful of that, try to tuck it back in the trees as much as we can. The 2-story element is towards the rear. Try to be respectful of the neighborhood, the fact that they're primarily single-family ranches. When you look at the front of the building, it's a single-story element. Okay, the larger parts of the building are near the back. Right, it's a different way of looking at Beach Mill. Right, it's a much different site, but being respectful of the neighborhood and of the environment is what this does. Okay, so that's what the committee came up with. We were, you know, one of the comments we got was the parking lot is a long ways away. We get it. Okay, we went back and through the power of mapping and GIS, we drew a line from the middle of every elementary school parking lot, all 56, to the middle of every building. All right, on the average, it's about 300 feet. Okay, all right.
Thank you.
All right, it's, you know what? We could do it in 15 minutes. All right, amazing. It's a little bit more than 400 feet on the previous plan. All right, but it's that way for a reason. Okay. If you look at the location of the green space and the gymnasium, all right, this encourages, even with adult supervision, kids to walk across the parking lot, all right, which in our business is a no-no. If you can avoid it, avoid it. Okay, so that's one reason. There's a little bit less green space, not overly significant in this concept. Okay, but the other one has a little more green space. And I'm going to show you the next slide, that the well field. All right, it's a geothermally driven building. All right, that's good business. All right, there are 280, 300 wells. All right, the well field is, we want the well field to be in the grassed areas. All right, we flipped Parkway, Ocean Lakes, and Centerville Elementary Schools this summer to geothermally driven buildings. About 900 wells are all in the grass areas. All right, so in the event that you have a problem, doesn't happen often, okay, you want to be able to go out and dig a hole in the grass and not dig up asphalt, okay? So, you know, so there's method to the madness.
Teachers.
Okay? All right, and so that the rows that you see represent the well field. Okay, so we prefer not to put the parking lot over top of the well field. All right, so let me talk a little bit about constructability. We approached this the design of this building with the idea that it made sense for the staff and students, and Cheryl will tell you this, we said that on day one, would go to swing space, all right? And so the existing building is where the well field will go, okay? If you have ever been at Thurgood in the morning or in the afternoon with parent drop-off and pickup, you know, it's an old school building. We didn't worry about separating cars and buses, all right? And it's chaos. All right, it's organized chaos, all right, but I would not want to try to build a 94,000 square foot two-story building over there in the fields. There will be virtually no laydown area, okay, and now you can do it, don't get me wrong, all right, given time and money, we can build almost anything, all right, you know, people do it in urban, you know, in cities all the time. There is a way. All right, but there are resources involved. All right, and so that's why we don't recommend it. All right, traffic. The project duration, if we build this building while they remain there, the project duration will get extended by on the order of 6 to 8 months. All right, it's not complicated. You build it next to it, it's difficult. All right, then you got to go back and tear it down. Then you got to put the well field in. Oh, by the way, if you've moved them in and the wells aren't in, all right, you've got to have a temporary heating and cooling plant. You're renting what you're going to end up owning, boilers, cooling towers. People do it all the time if they've got an endless amount of resources and all the time in the world. Okay, time is money. All right, so doing that will increase the cost of this project on the order of 5 to 7.5%. So that's 1.2 to roughly $1.7 million. Okay. We have been communicating, Sharon Lewis and her folks in Dossel. We've had meetings with both staffs. We have in motion plans that will start moving roughly 43 portable classrooms after the first of the year, coming from all levels, okay? We'll develop swing space around the rear of Hermitage. If you were going to pick a school to do it, Hermitage you couldn't find a better school. It's, I think, 0.7 of a mile, 3 or 4 minutes away. There's room back there. The inside of the building at Hermitage, we saved the old gym. It was actually a fairly new gymnasium, put the prototype and turned that into extra space. We're going to feed kids in there, and so we are working through the plans on transportation, how to feed. We have done this before. Okay, when we tore Brookwood down, we created swing space behind Plaza Elementary. We had kids outside, we had kids inside. The little kids come inside, the kindergartners come inside. Same thing occurred here. Everybody got fed. You know, kids got educated. All right, is it ideal? No. All right, we've done it before. When I came to work here 30 years ago, Rosemont Forest had 36 portable classrooms. John Mira was the AP. There were 1,000 kids outside. There were 800 kids inside for 1 year, waiting for Glenwood to open. There were no portable restrooms around back. We're gonna rent some portable restrooms. All right, kids got fed. Kids went to the restroom. Buses got in and out. We're gonna have an A schedule and a B schedule. All right, we're gonna create a temporary parking lot. So my point is there is a way to do it. Okay. And we have a community meeting scheduled on January the 17th over at Hermitage. We'll invite both communities to come out. If there's a plan, I'm sure there are questions. Not everybody's going to like it. I understand. All right, let me wrap up. We're fortunate here in this community to have immensely talented K through 12 designers right here. We don't need to go to Chicago or New York. We have talented people who do our work. Okay, they have experience in K through 12 work, whether that's architecture, structural engineering, mechanical engineering, land planners. All right, you have on your staff 2 licensed architects. I'm a licensed engineer. I don't practice engineering. You have technically competent staff. You've got project managers. You've got field people who know how to build things. Okay, a wealth of experience. We don't arrive at these plans similar to the way that we used to 30 years ago. Okay. Core values, you know, this was interesting for me. My wife pointed this out, okay? You know, put students first. Choosing actions that above all else support student learning. The buildings we are designing and building today do that better than we used to do it 30 years ago. Where Dr. Spence went to school at Green Run is a great place, okay? We would not want to design a traditional building like that today. All right, these buildings that we build today are 100-year buildings, flexible. Okay, I am happy to say that at Kellam High School, the accordion partition walls are now being pulled open, and they are sharing between classrooms. Okay, seek growth, continuous learning. Right, and open to change, innovation. All right. I think that this school division has a track record of innovating. We're not afraid to try new things. I don't think we're reckless in doing that. I think we do it collaboratively, and I think that we design and build some of the best schools in this country. You know, and I can tell you that we do it better than anybody in the Commonwealth. So with that, I hope that we have answered all of your questions from our lengthy presentation a month ago, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Manning.
Okay, so thank you for that thorough presentation. I did some research on schools that were built in the Commonwealth last year, 2016-17, elementary schools specifically. I did it on middle schools, but we'll have that conversation another time.
Okay.
What is the cost per square foot of the proposed Thorogood building?
Okay.
Building cost.
Sure. Well, I'll give it to you. We don't have it broken out yet. I'll give it to you the construction cost. Okay.
Okay.
Which is quite simply is based on the construction budget, not the project budget. All right. So the construction budget is on the order of $24 million, not 28.3. All right. Included in that is demolition. All right. A lot of the data that you find in the Commonwealth's database, the projects do not include demolition. So that's on the order of probably $4 to $5 a square foot. But Thorogood is programmed as a building that will be in next year's money $255 a square foot.
Okay, and that's building only costs?
No, building and site. Building and site. That's construction costs. In other words, when we bring a contract to you next summer, okay, if you go through the capital project, you'll see different funding line items. You'll see inspection, support, design, construction, furniture and fixtures, and then contingencies. Okay.
Okay, so what is the total cost per square foot?
$255 a square foot. It's
Is
the
the
total
total?
Construction cost that is projected. We just got our estimate in. We are on budget based on the engineers, the A&E estimate. All right, so this is what happens in our world of construction cost. All right, and let me explain that so all of you guys can understand. All right, the number that we share with the community and that the Commonwealth shares is the construction cost. All right, the site and the building cost. All right, Kellam I shared with you $168 a square foot was the cost of the building. The cost of the construction was on the order of about $215 a square foot. All right, that's the number that people in our industry talk about. All right, I think what happens is people go to the project budget, which includes furniture and equipment, sometimes site acquisition, design fees, contingencies, inspection and support, and they roll all that in, and you get a cost that's like $300 or $305 a square foot. All right, that's not a number that the industry recognizes. The number that we all talk to is the construction cost number.
So when I'm looking at the Department of Education's cost data report, building only cost per square feet, what would that be for Thorogood?
I'd have to give you an estimate because we don't have it broken down between building and site.
Okay.
Okay. Typically, the site cost is probably on the order of $45 a square foot, give or take. Okay. So $255 total construction cost. Site cost is probably $45 or $50, and building cost is probably $200, $205, something like that. Okay.
Okay. So.
But please, we're not there yet.
Well, I
Okay.
just want to compare apples to
Sure.
apples with what was constructed around the state last year, and building only costs around the state. The average was $178 a square foot.
Right. Last year.
2016-17.
Right.
And one of the higher ones, and again, we'll say use Northern Virginia, Loudoun County, for
Yeah.
example, $178 a square foot.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. 205s, 206s.
So I would like to see us being somewhere in the average of the state, not way off of the state average.
So are you saying we're supposed to subtract the 45 from the 225?
From the 250.
55.
See, here's what I don't. This is where I hate to say this, but this is where people who don't do this for a living get confused. Right? I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. Okay.
Well, I understand. I understand cost of doing
Okay.
business. I understand all of that.
the
But
best
we also
number to
have
use-
but costs
Okay.
are very important to me as
I
well.
understand. They are to us. They are to us. You've approved a capital program, and council has approved a capital project that gave us a project budget. It is our job to live by that. All right, we take that very seriously. I'm telling you that the best number to use is the cost to construct the project.
Okay. And the 0.25% per square foot that you stated, that a round building would be 0.25%, it would cost more. Is that material and labor costs, or is that just?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, sir.
The last year projects she's citing, are those projects that were completed in that year?
Yes.
Okay. And we're talking about a project that's going to be completed, 3 years from now?
The most recent one was, the contract was awarded February 2017.
Those are typically either bid dates or contract dates.
Contract award.
This will be likely a 17, 18, maybe 18, 19 number.
Yeah.
Okay. I will tell you that historically, we compare ourselves to the Commonwealth, and school planning and management we're in Region 3, all right? So which includes the Carolinas, and so we compare ourselves to those two as far as benchmarks. And year in and year out, we are very competitive, sometimes cheaper, sometimes a little bit more. If you look in some of the Norfolk schools, you'll find some Norfolk schools, all right? They're nice school buildings. They're not geothermally driven buildings. They're energy hogs, okay? And so they're not as efficient. They're not as well constructed. They don't have the flexibility that a Thorogood has or that an Older Nation school has. So we recognize that. I've told you before, I don't mean to sound flippant, we know how to build a box.
We can do that.
Okay, we can do that. Anybody can do that. People do that all across the Commonwealth. There's a school in Suffolk. It's a nice school building. It's a box.
Any other questions? We do need to move on here soon. Ms. McLeod.
Mine is not a question. It's just to thank Tony for a great presentation and taking the time to look into some of the things to better explain so we all can have a better understanding. I got involved and ended up running for school board as a result of serving on the facilities steering committee. and I've a great respect for the people that his team and work. One of his neighbors used to, or one of his colleagues used to be my neighbor, and it's I think it's important to remember too, as he already said too. If we didn't spend as much on a building, then we could get to other buildings sooner. But it's worthwhile to go and build the buildings right and for the purpose that they're doing. So I do believe that Tony and his team look out for the expenditures and make sure that we're being good stewards of our money. And I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think
Thank
we're
y'all.
ready to move on. Thank you very much. Yep.
Now we get to talk about budget.
And next is budget, a pre-budget workshop.
Were we just here? It seems like it was just a year ago, wasn't it?
I know.
Budget man.
There you go.
Good evening, Chairman Anderson, Chairwoman
Yes,
Anderson,
I got it.
Vice Chair Edwards, members of the school board, Dr. Spence, and my colleagues, and maybe my friendly staff. Imagine that there's a round glass window that helps me with my mental from what Tony said. Okay, I'm sorry. We're just gonna spend a few minutes just laying a little bit of groundwork, reminding you of some numbers that was in the 5-year forecast, and then we're gonna get right into the discussion with you. The purpose of this workshop is to have a dialogue and a discussion with you about what you are going to give us with guidance, the superintendent and myself, as we build next year's budget. We don't know any more today than we knew when we did the 5-year forecast. The big part of what's missing right now is the governor's budget. Sometime in the middle of December, we would expect to have that. It'll take us some days or maybe a week or two to diagnose what he's proposing and analyzing what he's proposing. Typically, the Virginia Department of Education, their budget people usually turn around and give us a calculation tool, usually a week or so after the governor rolls out his budget. So sometime maybe before Christmas, certainly by the first of the year, we'll have a better handle on at least what the state's going to do or what the governor's proposing. Just want to remind you some of the major cost items that we projected in the 5-year forecast, and just remind you of what we base those projections on. The proposed expense for a 2% salary increase for all employees. Remember, that's the biggest part of our budget anyway. Salary and benefits, it makes up about 85%. So any 1% increase is right around $5 million. That's about what it costs. We think the VRS rate will not go up. We actually think some component of it's going to come down. That will help us a little bit next year. Health insurance, we projected 3% in the 5-year forecast. That's yet to be determined. We just spent the better part of yesterday afternoon with Optima Health. They gave us the third quarterly report and the expense trend and what it was for the third quarter. It's a little higher than the first 2 quarters. So we'll do an analysis of all that and certainly within the next 2 months, we'll have a better handle, and by the time we roll out the superintendent assessment of needs, we'll be able to determine, are we able to hold a 3%? Can we do with less than 3%? How much of that we have to pass on to employees with employee premiums? So that's yet to be determined, but our assumption right now is, and 3% is well below the national average. We think we can hold that for another year or two because we've built up a good fund balance in the healthcare fund. So even if we chip away at that and reduce it a little bit, it may offset some of the higher average costs nationwide that people are experiencing. With all those assumptions we made, next year we're still projecting a deficit of almost $9 million. Reminding you of the second year, and that's a big hit to us, that additional increase up to $9 million the second year is totally increased debt service. Nothing we can control. It's based on when the city had sold bonds and what our portion of that debt service is. Just the budgetary challenges and goals as we're going forward. We shared this with you at the joint briefing of the 5-year forecast. But again, providing competitive compensation for our employees, whatever we can do to make sure we have a handle and as much as we can minimize the additional cost of employee benefits that cost employees money. Reminding you, we have a structurally flawed budget and that we're using about $8.3 million this year of one-time money. The 5-year forecast, we're projecting to chip away that $2 million a year. And I think that may be doable. So anyway, that's a goal. Technology, that's becoming a big expense. It's just not the technology program for the instructional program, but there's a lot of infrastructure upgrades that have to be made in technology. There are some of them related to security. Some of those can be deferred. You'll see on the unmet needs some information regarding that. Some of those unmet needs can be deferred for a while. Some of them can't. We'll have to do them. It's becoming more of an increased cost every year. Whatever programmatic priorities that we have next year and the coming years, hopefully by the end of this evening, y'all will give us some feedback about what you expect us to be budget priorities for next year. And of course, the ongoing issue of state and federal mandates. That's money that we're paying out now. Most of it is local money that to meet state and federal mandates that we get very little, in some cases no, help from the state or the federal government. I'm going to turn it over now to Ms. Woodhouse, and then we'll give it to Daniel. And they're going to talk. You've asked some questions. You wanted to know a little bit more about. We added some positions in the budget this year. What did that do to class sizes? I'm going to let my two colleagues take it from here, and you're on.
All right, thanks, Farrell. First and foremost, I want to thank you on behalf of middle schools for the 10 additional allocations we received last year to strategically address class size at the middle school level. As you can see, we really were able to look at all of our core content areas and work to reduce the class sizes in those specific subject areas. So on average, we were able to lower the class size by 2 in most cases, and 1 you'll see kind of in our math area. Many times people will ask why social studies and science numbers tend to be the highest, and that's because when you look at the middle school scheduling and in terms of where we sometimes will have pull out of students who need additional supports, those tend to be in the English and the math content areas. But then when you look at science and social studies, all students tend to take those classes, which brings those numbers up a little bit. And so we were very pleased in terms of lowering the core class size average. Also, if you'll take a look, in terms of the middle school core classes over 30, we were able to reduce that as well pretty significantly. And I say that because when you look at the middle school schedule, I don't think we'll ever have situations where we will not have a class over 30, but we did make sure that we didn't have any classes over at least 32. And for why I want to explain to you is because typically we have fewer numbers in our honors and advanced coursework. So if we have 65 students who are taking or have requested geometry at a particular school, we're going to run those numbers, but then we're going to run 2 sessions with 32 in a class versus adding a 3rd session where there's only 20 in a class. Because then if we ran 20 in a geometry class, then the other core classes would be a lot higher. And so what our principals tend to do is they take a look at all course loads across the board. And so if there isn't a geometry teacher that has 31 or 32 in one class, then they make sure that the core classes they have are a little lower, maybe 26 or 27, to kind of balance off the numbers. But I don't think that in the middle school level we will ever see a situation where we won't have a few of our advanced courses. And keeping in mind, our classes, that core classes that are over 30 are our advanced classes. So I was able to use the 10 allocations to strategically work with the schools. And when I say strategic, right down to the point of, I'm coming out to see you, let me see your numbers, I Liz with a master schedule, and let's see what we can do first. The same way that HR mentioned, we have staff who transfer during the summertime. Well, we battle that same issue with our student population. So we register our students for classes in January, and then by the time we finish our master schedules in August, you could have had, if you have a school with a mobility rate of 25%, you've just lost a quarter of those students, and we now have new students with new options and new requests. And so we are constantly revamping, revising, and looking at our master schedule, not only up until the first day of school, but also when we get that September 30 count. Now, we have a little dilemma at the middle school level, which is actually a very positive dilemma. And you'll probably remember in the early 2000s, we implemented our pull-out program in terms of students who need academic support, who are unsuccessful in the SOL test. Well, obviously now with 100% accreditation and our schools and our students doing much better, we have fewer students being pulled for academic support and more students taking electives, which is a wonderful dilemma to face. But so with the 10 allocations, we also had to now take a look at elective classes that are just exceeding the caps that we would like to have. And so by analyzing the numbers and having some conversations with some individual schools, middle school is requesting 10 additional allocations because we do believe, and I do firmly believe, that we can continue to address the core areas, especially social studies. I'm not quite pleased with the social studies numbers. I would like to get that down to at least 30, but also address the elective classes that are down booming, which, again, that's a great dilemma to have. Yeah, that if there's any problems I'm going to have, I'd love to have that one. And so that's our request for middle school.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Daniel?
Good evening. I share Cheryl's sentiment when it comes to principals and their appreciation for the additional allocations provided at the high school level in 17-18. And the slide that you see in front of you now shows average classes across all high schools, those specific courses back, and what we were able to do with those additional allocations last year in terms of reducing the class size average. Now, we offer more classes than that in the core subject areas, and I picked these out specifically for a couple of reasons. One, it's because we saw the most drastic drop. Two, because those are areas that our principals feel like really need a focus in terms of some smaller class sizes. So that's why I picked those courses. If you ask me about chemistry, I'd tell you that the average is somewhere in the 27 range in chemistry this year. So we've got that information, but I wanted to include this for you, and it shows the decrease as a result of the 25. Additionally, we attempted, maybe the next one, Farrell, thank you. Based on your feedback and input and that from teachers and principals, one of the things that we really attempted to address with the additional allocations was reducing the number of teachers that taught more than 150 students. And you'll note in 16-17, and the number does drop over the course of the year for any number of reasons, students coming in and out of programs, hiring additional staff, rebalancing the schedule. But we went from 93 at the start of last year, and we're down at 65 at the end of the year. The average number over 150 started at 166 and dropped to 163. As we started this year, we actually started the year with more teachers when we did the snapshot. It was October 2nd, 99 that were teaching over 150, but that average over 150 dropped to 155. And then we did another snapshot on November 7th. It's down to 154 of the 88 teachers. And currently we have 84 teachers as of, I think I pulled it on Sunday. So we have currently 84 teachers who are teaching over 150. 78% of that group has 5 or 6 over 150. So that number there is not an average, but that's the total number of teachers that are teaching.
And that's not just core classes, is that electives also?
Some electives, not all electives.
Okay.
For instance, health and PE would
Right.
not fall into that category. So as we talk about budget for 18-19, we are at the high school level additionally requesting 25 FTEs to help us, I think, eliminate those teachers that are over 150. That would be the goal.
How many again?
Say again?
How many again?
25.
25, okay, so it's the same as last year.
Here.
Two of those.
Thank you, Danny.
Oh, can you just repeat again, Mr. Keever, the 150, that's the number, the plus 150, you're,
Right, so,
It's just new data. We don't have the average.
right, the average, my suspicion,
but it
I
should
wanna-
be
I
on the
would
low
guess.
side, like the two above it, the lower side.
correct.
versus
At some
the
point I can come
top.
back to you and tell you what the average is. My suspicion is that somewhere in the 153 range at this juncture.
Thank
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You have, and only about half of it is up here because this was a long list, but we've given you a paper handout of the unmet needs.
Yes.
Yes, I want to just note, this is not in any kind of priority order. It's just in the highest dollar to the lowest dollar order. We separated the non-technology items and the technology items, and then they've got separate totals at the bottom of each of those columns. We're giving you, for example, in number 3, that $8,566,000 is composed of those things that are right under it. So you have the detail for what those are, and that's also in number 4. Anyway, those where we had multiple items with different dollars that make up the total, we've listed it on the sheet under that particular item. So that's the format of this. We thought that this might be helpful to you as you think about in your own mind what you as a board member would recommend to the school board as going forward with building next year's budget, those things that you think we might consider being priority items. And really with that, I'm gonna shut up, and it's really it's your meeting. You need to talk about this, discuss this, ask us questions, review the information that we've given you.
Mr. Edwards.
As you moved forward in your $3 million shortfall for next year and the $9 million the following year, did that include the currently planned program adjustments, specifically full-day kindergarten expansion?
Yes, sir.
It does?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
We included in the additional, the ongoing $6,750,000 for kindergarten expansion and the number of additional kindergarten teacher and teacher assistants that it will,
How was that?
which would still leave a balance of about $2 million.
How was that? Okay.
Which is what we.
For year 3?
For next year.
2.
For next year.
You too.
Goal.
For year 2.
Next year.
For year 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's 11 schools? Was that 11 more schools
Approximately
next year?
11 schools. Yep.
Ms. Fry?
Yes, I'll start with a question. Where would increased special ed funding be on this stuff?
I'm sorry.
The
Special ed.
special ed, the 5-year plan, and some of it, there's a budget component, so where would?
Well, that won't necessarily
that's the
show up in
operating
here.
budget.
This
Okay.
will be yeah, I wanna make sure. This does not, everything for next year's
These are
budget.
unmet. These are unmet.
That's
These
the
are
operating
more or less
budget.
the really big items that some of them have been unmet needs for a long time. In addition, we expanded this list because we've really never shown you, for example, in the first one there, what the backlog is of school buses. You know, we keep talking about we need 50 school buses
So we really
just
need
to
150.
meet the baseline replacements, but we got a backlog, so we really need 50 plus every year.
Right.
So anyway, so the operating budget, that's what we're in the process of developing, and those will be a year to year. Amy will give us what in her professional judgment needs to be put in the base budget for next year, and then the following year and the following. We didn't necessarily see that as an unmet need. We hope to deal with that each year in the base budget, if I'm answering the question.
Thank you.
Ms. Manning?
The field lights, it says 7.5 schools. Is that what we have left still to do, is the 7.5?
Yes.
Yeah, based on the fact that we did set aside some money out of the year in reversion to address one high school, and this would
Okay.
address the remaining high schools.
Okay,
Excellent.
thank you.
So that just gives you a cost picture. Again, doesn't mean we can do it, but you know
Yeah.
what the cost is.
Ms. McLeod?
Okay. There's something that Daniel and Cheryl both said, and I'm sorry, that concerns me, and so that's why I'm looking at their, asking for 10 additional in middle school and 25 at the high school level. Mentioning that it was our advanced classes, especially in the middle school, this concerns me. You mentioned geometry specifically. The fact that one of our advanced classes being packed with so many kids, those kids are getting high school credit. They're not mature enough, in my opinion, although mine took geometry as an 8th grader. But developmentally, and so it's very concerning to have that large of a class size and to ensure success, because they're transferring that to high school credit GPAs, and that's impacting their, what they do beyond that. So that's the first time I've kind of heard it put to a class or to a specific group of students specifically. And I know we do worry about our core classes and our English and the skills they have to have there, but if we're not looking out for those kids and we put too many in one classroom and they can't be successful, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot, basically. And we want them to do well. So, of course, I love the good, bad problem to have in regarding the fine arts. So I see here for fine arts, there's some additional elementary, middle, and high school. I don't know, that is in addition to your 10, 25, and okay, all right, making sure I understood that. I am excited to see that you all put in here a school counselor 1 for additional each high school. And that's something that I have believed for a very long time that we don't do well enough. I think that our guidance counselors many times are do a huge amount of scheduling and those kind of things, and they're not doing career counseling. They don't have the opportunity, and if we were able to decrease their load enough, we're talking about all the different pathways they have to accomplish what is a successful student, what are they doing when they get out of school. There are, this is a conversation that happens, I would say, at least once a week in my work world in regarding to the number of, we need welders, and Tony's talked about it. We don't have enough plumbers. We don't have enough electrician. We don't have enough of these. And if our counselor, our high school counselors can't help guide our students, that, that's a bummer. And I think it's something that the private schools do extremely well, and that the public schools aren't able to do as well. So I would love to throw 2 in to each one, to be honest, but if we can do it one at a time, then we'll do it one at a time. So I think I'll stop there. Obviously, everything we've always talked about in regard to bus replacement. I think that if I had to pick for the additional personnel costs, definitely trying to, getting it balanced. And I think you've already included in there, now that I realize it, is getting the unified pay scale, getting that. So I think we finally are accomplishing that. And then last year we were willing to take a little bite in the how much we use for the one-time funds. I'd love to see that decreased, because we were on that path, but we took a little back step. So I'd love to see if we could try to nibble a little bit of that off again. So I'll stop just in giving those thoughts right now.
And just a reminder that one of the assumptions in the 5-year forecast on the school side was a phased-in reduction of that, about $2 million a year over 4 years. So just a reminder.
Yep. Thank you.
Anybody else? Ms. Weems?
Just for, and I know this is not here because it's special education, but just for my planning purposes, when I see the estimation of needs, where do I go? Direct me to where I go to find out in middle school and high school how many students on an IEP are in general ed classes. Not an average, but how do we go about seeing that?
Class by class? That's a pretty tremendous ask.
Well, I'm not saying
we can
that.
find
No,
it. We can do it. But
No, I said, how do I do that? Direct me how I do that. I didn't say y'all.
You
because,
can't. I mean, I don't know how you could. We'd have to.
Yeah.
Because we have,
Maybe,
and I don't know,
maybe
does
start with
anybody
core
else,
classes?
does anybody else hear from teachers saying, I've got 12 kids on IEPs, I've got 16 kids in my class on IEPs.
So these are being mainstreamed, and,
Yeah,
and these are
and-
regular
yeah.
classroom teachers that are,
And so that's,
right.
that's a special education
And
class,
that's a
so
big
I want,
concern.
I think that's a huge concern, and I wanna address that in the budget, and so I'm just letting everybody know that that's, and
So the
I'm
way,
seeing
the way,
nod heads,
yeah. So the way to address that in the budget is to just increase allocations
Okay.
of general education teachers. Because what happens is, so you'll get, let's say you're hearing 12 in a class. So let's say across 3 English teachers, you'll have the one with an inclusion teacher who's available to them, and then that person's not available to any of the other English teachers because they're going up and down the grade levels. So all of the inclusion teachers will be, all of the inclusion students will be in that one class. So you've got to then increase allocations to address that. And I actually say the 10 elementary positions, and Shireen's not here to talk about it, that you see on the additional full-time requests for strategic class size reduction, actually those are related to more teachers for inclusion.
More teachers for inclusion and Spanish immersion.
Okay,
But
and then
primarily
also,
more for inclusion.
okay, yeah, and also I was gonna say Spanish immersion, Amy, you got that, you're working on that, I wanna see something with the Spanish immersion at the elementary, at the other side of the city, so we have both sides of the city. Just wanna put that in again.
Mr. McDonald?
I would like us to find out what the cost would be to be included in the disparity study the city's doing.
Regalo, I'd also like to brief you on some of the legal issues relevant to that before, as we go into that area.
Okay.
May I piggyback on, it's not, with what Carolyn brought up regarding the special ed and IEPs. I think that as much information as you can provide us, it's not a budget issue, but I think even Joel, Kim, and I would love to look at that legislatively when things are happening that way, for the, when we're talking to legislators, and for them to have a better understanding with, some of the situations we deal with. The increase especially of showing the number of kids that are on IEPs and that, to understand the workload of teachers and then
Yeah,
what.
now that we can give you.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've already, we've talked about understanding this best practices, and what we're asking the SBA, they added that language to their legislative agenda as well, so that they have an understanding. So we should be prepared for those kind of things, the best practices that we think,
I'm just trying to think of how I can figure out how to
Yeah.
tell you what the average number
Right.
of kids with an IEP in our classes is that wouldn't be overly burdensome in terms of having to go class by class. So
Right.
I'll think about that, but we
and it
can
may
give you
add
some
to that,
other.
yeah.
It would be an interesting and useful data point because we're already trying to hammer the point that the special ed population is increasing.
Exactly.
While
So-
we're footing a much
So
larger
if you're diving
portion
into
of
the
that
numbers, you
building
might as well
than it
kill
should
two
be.
birds with one stone.
Well, we know we are increasing for sure.
Yeah.
And we
That's
know
a
that
that's a
the funding
special
hasn't changed.
case
Yeah.
for
Thank you.
mainstream classes.
Miss Manning.
Just one quick thing, if maybe we could have a little bit more of a conversation at some point about the increased allowances for advanced degrees. I just noticed that we're pretty far behind on that and being competitive. So if we can, is that really affecting our ability to be competitive in getting the teachers with the advanced degrees? So if we could maybe have a more in-depth conversation about that, I appreciate it.
And with that, can you share with us as a superintendent why that's more important? How an advanced degree improves the quality of education?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I know.
We can talk about it.
I'm pretty interested.
Yeah. There's, depends, whose research do you want to read?
Yeah, but I mean, that would just be,
But we can talk about it. I
that
think
help us
there is a
formulate-
competitiveness
yeah.
problem
Yeah.
that we've been looking at. I mean, I don't think that's changed since '96. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Okay.
So it's been,
I'm sure
over a
there's folks
decade.
back there that can send me links.
2 decades, actually.
Oh, thank you. My math is bad. Yeah. So 20 years. So probably something we need to look at, but gotta have an ROI. So I understand the question.
Yeah.
Anybody else have some pet things they'd like pushed tonight?
Oh, we have so much to think about.
I just have a
Ms. Riggs?
question. You talked about, and I don't remember where it was, might have been when you were talking in there, the health insurance, you said 3%. It's gonna be going up 3% the next.
No.
What
Let me-
is?
Let me clarify.
Yeah.
We projected in the 5-year forecast that health insurance costs would go up 3% a year. That's about half right now of what the national average is. If you remember, Mr. Moss said in some of his comments that was low. Well, it was. It is low. But the reason we projected is because we've built a sizable fund balance in the healthcare fund.
Okay.
That if the cost is 6 and we build revenues in for 3, which is a portion that the board would put in, a portion that employees would put in, we still have to make the additional 3%. We would use some of the fund balance in the healthcare fund to reduce that.
Which is what we used to do when we used it
Yeah,
all
but
up, right?
what we're doing,
Correct.
what our plan would be to be more conservative in the use of that and never draw that down. We drew it down to $2 million.
Right.
And when we really need to have an operating, we need to have 1 month operating, which is about $15 million, so that we can pay the bills when those claims come in. So we don't know what we're going to have to pass on to employees if we have to pass anything along until we get a little further along. And so certainly as we get into the middle of January, we're going to have a better feel. We can share that. We would probably do a memorandum if we don't have a joint briefing to the school board and to the city council to give you an update on where we are with the healthcare program for the following year.
Okay.
And we'll have more information at that time.
Okay.
Mr. Edwards?
I'd like to flip the dialogue, and there's obviously some big variables that the superintendent over the next 2 months will have some time off for the holidays, but then be finalizing an estimate of needs. Big variables that you need to know whether we want to see them on the inside as met or on that other sheet which is unmet. Are there any things that we ought to dialogue that would help you in that regard?
Well, I mean, what would help me, certainly it's helpful to hear on the unmet side, what are the things that would be priorities for you? They're not currently in the operating budget, obviously, and so facing a deficit, any major changes is going to be difficult at best, but it's good to know which ones are the priorities if we can find ways to do that. I think the other discussion then is on the inside as met, are there things within the budget that you have things that you'd like us to focus on? So, I mean, we've had conversation of several different items in the past, and are there areas you'd like us to take a closer look that you have questions about as we develop the budget? Some guidance on that's important for us.
Right, because what I've heard so far.
Well,
I'm
let me
sorry.
give you.
Go ahead.
Let me give you an example. And Dan, maybe this is what you're getting at. If I'm off track, I'm shooting myself in the foot, I guess. But employee travel, you've brought up several times. That's an existing operating budget item, and it's an operating budget across any number of different items. There have been questions raised about it, and so the question is that something that the board considers? I mean, philosophically, something that we shouldn't be doing, something that we should continue to do. We can't. I mean, as we develop the budget, we're operating on the assumption that because that's been approved in previous budget, that that's something that the board philosophically agrees with administration on, which is that employee travel is important. Employee travel allows us to get our people out, see what's happening in the world, and make sure that they can bring those things back, and we can continue to stay current as a school division on what's happening in education. If there's a philosophical disagreement with that, we need to have that before we develop the budget, so we don't then end up putting it in the budget and then finding out it shouldn't be in the budget. I guess that's my point, and I think, Dan, maybe that's to some degree where you're going. Are there issues like that we need to just tackle before we develop the budget so we have that direction from the board?
Right.
Do we need to tackle them tonight or later?
Well, I don't think we have time to tackle them tonight, but I think.
Yeah, let's not bring it up tonight.
Why don't you go over the
But
key
yeah.
points between now and estimate of needs on, obviously, we can email you anytime. Is this our last shot, your last shot at us and our last shot at you before estimate of needs?
No,
Or
we've got 2 more meetings before the estimate of needs.
Right, but I mean, will this sort of dialogue be on the agenda or not?
We can certainly workshop again on the budget, but we can set that up for both of those meetings as a brief
Yeah.
conversation,
Yeah.
just to follow
Right.
through on any of that we need to.
Especially if somebody has
But if it's
something burning.
Yeah, and if it's
they-
burning and it's a particular issue to you, I would also say, my office to your office, come on in and let's chat and see if I can't get an understanding of that either if it's particular to you as a board member, we then could bring back to that workshop and have some dialogue around it to get some clear direction from the group as a whole.
And that's fair, and that's what he's saying.
Exactly.
One thing that would be helpful to me, at least right now, is you've made fully funding the unified scale a priority for the last 5 years. And we've got the last leg of it, which is about $2 million.
Good question, Carol.
I would ask, is that still a priority?
Yes.
That's helpful. Whether we can do all 2 million, but
Right,
that's
yeah.
okay.
Definitely.
Thank you.
It would, though, I mean, it doesn't negate the need to get an understanding of what your priorities are on the unmet needs
Right.
list, because if there are opportunities to address some of them, we want to. And I think we've heard pretty clearly across the board on a couple of different occasions, counselors.
Yeah.
So we've heard that as a need. We understand strategic class size reduction will continue to be a need. I think we've developed a pretty good plan to try to continue to address that. Anything else on
One other
there?
thing that I thought of. Are we gonna continue talking about the funding of kindergarten in 5 years, or are we gonna talk about it in 3 years? What are we gonna be doing with that? Are we gonna stay on that track, the track that we?
Well, we only have enough funding really to cover what we had planned as the original 3-year expansion.
Okay.
And so we don't have funding for a 5-year expansion, which the estimate on 5 years was 14 million. So we don't have that funding. I think we have to get to understand the revenue picture down the road, whether or not we'll be able to continue that expansion unless we've got additional support from the city or not, or maybe we don't. But we don't know that till we know what the revenue looks like.
Are you stretching it out over the next 2 years, or are you in a position to move faster than we came out of the starting blocks?
Yeah.
Well, we've had this conversation before. We're in a position to do it either way. I think it's the will of the board. We can do more schools than we did. We needed to do this year to find out for sure what all of that was going to entail. We feel really good about the process. I hope you feel good about the process. We've heard nothing but positives out of our schools that have put those on board. So we feel we could go faster, but we also know the discussion through the transmittal letter and the resolution was there were other needs that needed to be met. So to me, it's a will of the board conversation. We can go either way.
One other
So we
question
had
about that. I'm sorry, just
Go
to
ahead.
follow up. And I said something to Sharon, or I guess no, it was Leslie. Have you guys decided at this point, or are you at the point where you know which schools
you're going to include as full-day kindergarten.
We know it's 11. We're not ready to say which of the schools.
And the reason I'm asking is because constituents are asking about that
We'll
for
get
their
that out.
future. And
We'll get that out well in
their
advance of kindergarten registration, but we also need to know, that the budget's there for it.
Okay.
Because I think from what I'm hearing in the constituents and the community, where they don't have it yet, is that as we implement, let's say 11 next year and 11 the following year, and then we come to a stopping point because we have no more funds, I do think we will have constituents out there helping us
the city council
find money from either city council or whatever, to make it a priority to fully fund it and get it and finish it. Because what I'm hearing now is, when is my school going to get it? I mean, and I'm not hearing this from teachers. I'm hearing it from parents and people who have future kids who are, ready. They are clamoring to have it in their neighborhood.
And I understand that, and I think it's fair. Because, why didn't I get mine? Well, everybody has to wait their turn. That's just the way it is, and what have you. But there's a lot of things that won't get accomplished if we don't budget it out. That one-time funding can be used wisely, and if we know, I'm not going to drop the bone, guys. I'm letting you know that there's it's a perfect opportunity for us to finish some of those one-time funding things. So Beverly already teed me up. I should get my notes ready, but I'm not dropping the bone.
But I will let you know that one of all the things that I heard tonight so far for your priorities, no one talked about any one-time funding things. I mean, I heard about adding more teachers, counselors.
I'll start talking.
Can we still get
yes.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean,
right.
there are some things on here that are important to me. I just don't want to monopolize the conversation.
All right, Miss Rye, I know you were next, and then.
I just wanted to validate about the strategic class size reduction and the school counselor that, again, I've mentioned it already about that it was part of Dr. Robertson's departmental review, a recommendation that came out of that, so I'm very happy to see that on here for all the reasons Mrs. McLeod mentioned and more. And just a fine arts question, maybe it's a Mr. Keever question. The high school 5.4, is that to restore what was, there was some capacity lost a few years ago? Yes?
The idea with the additional allocation of fine arts, I mean, you can take it if you want to. I didn't mean to. I know she pitched it your way.
I'm not going to answer now. Go ahead.
The idea is to get to an established allocation of fine arts teaching positions at the high school level that would allow us to rebuild some of the programs that have been lost. So we have part-time drama in some schools, we have part-time band in some schools, and what we hear from the teachers is they're unable to grow those programs because they're not in the building full-time.
So that's why I want to add that to my list. And that's it. And the unified scale is listed here as number 9.
I'm sorry, I missed that, but yeah.
I'll get you, but Mr. Edwards is on the list, and then I'll get you.
This list will probably be helpful if we sorted it by one time and ongoing. Right now it's sort of a mixed bag. You've got one times and ongoing sort of everything. I mean, if you're smart enough to realize if you're adding positions that are ongoing or not, but if we want to shift our focus from time to time between the two,
we'll reorient. So you can have this and that.
The other thing, I hear from those in the community that yes, we had a dialogue with the city about how we were going to deal with the money, but we also made a commitment to them. We set up as a 5-year plan because we thought it might take us 5 years to get there. We didn't say we were going to deliberately go slow to save money for other things. We made a commitment to try to get it done, and they gave us part of the money, not all of it. But we went to the extent that we're not spending the money for it, and we got it for it, and we are in a position to do it. We are encumbering just criticism from people out in the community, and I've heard it like, okay, you got that kindergarten money, why aren't you doing kindergarten? And year 1 was easy to explain. Year 2 will be less easy to explain if we're able to go faster than we are.
That's not right.
Kim and I respectfully disagree with you.
You-
Because it was in the resolution that said we were going to use it for one-time money.
It wasn't.
So
Right.
it was there. So what
But it
the
didn't-
difference is that the fact that they did not comprehend or it wasn't expressed well, that's the problem. But it was perfectly transparently clear that we were going to spend some of it on starting kindergarten, some for one time. And so it was in the resolution that went. What could have potentially been better was their understanding of what went forward.
Right. I totally agree with that. I think the people that have misinterpreted it just didn't listen last
Correct.
spring when we were doing, or last winter when we were making the budget. They weren't listening. They were hearing what they wanted to
I
hear.
was telling people that's what it was.
So, Miss Manning and then Mr. McDonald.
Sorry.
So since you were asking what's important in here, I mean, to me, reducing class sizes and teacher workload is the most important thing to me out of all of these unmet needs. How we do that, you know, Mr. Keever and Ms. Woodhouse just, you know, kind of gave their recommendations. So I think that we need to heed their recommendations. I got a call from a teacher today, exasperated. She said, I understand you guys are talking about the budget. I've got over 30 kids in my high school science class, and we're dying with those numbers. So I really think that we need to address that.
Mr. McDonald.
Thank you. I agree. I think the strategic class size reductions that we're doing, I appreciate seeing some of the results tonight. I'd like to continue trying to do that as best as we can. Fine arts teachers, I was very upset when that got dropped off the last budget for dedicated fine arts allocations, and so I'd like to see us be able to do that. And of course, the equity adjustments we're working on. As far as the one-time needs, I think we've hashed out sort of our priorities on that a few times, and in many ways left it up to administration to say these are what we see as priorities now that need to be funded, and I'm okay continuing down that path. On full day kindergarten, I understand the arguments for all sides. My concern is that the 5-year plan was in part cautiously optimistic to, after 3 years, seeing what our finances look like, hoping that the economy would improve. So perhaps we could cover more of the costs within the school division and not necessarily lay the bill at city council, and hopefully not have or have a lesser possible tax increase to cover that. I think everyone's on the same page on trying to get there. We just want to make sure we do it in the most cautiously optimistic and thoughtful way. And I have no problem explaining that to people. And I'm holding on to that same bone. I think we have these one-time needs that have been here for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And that was the discussion we had very publicly. And if people don't understand that or don't understand the difference between one-time monies and ongoing monies, then that's something that we need to continue expressing. The conversation from HR was truncated a little bit on some of the things that we were asked to consider that might have budget implications as far as the instructional pay scale goes. And so I guess the question I want to lay on the table for the board in sort of giving some guidance to HR was, is there anything we want them to come up with numbers-wise for consideration? For example, going to a 30-year scale that might have steps in it, how would that work? What would the cost implications be, so that we can start thinking about that? And this is something that's come up over and over again, and I think we're at a point where maybe we need to get some actual numbers.
To add to Joel, I put down, and I forgot to say it, I'd love to know a number on how much additional money they'd like towards signing bonuses to get those hard-to-get teachers. They didn't kind of really throw that out there, so I'd love to know that kind of a number.
Well, I would say that's not a priority. We've got that in the operating budget now, probably at the level we need it to be at.
Yeah, is it at the level we need it to be?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, I'll follow back up, but
budget dust might
I've asked that, and we feel pretty good about that. I think it's, I think to Joel's point, I think the compensation philosophy and where we'd like to land in terms of the compensation expectations is really important. So do we continue to do what we have now, which is the experience step, which you could, with no raise, just move between experience steps and have the money be the same year to year. You know what I mean? But you're still moving a step. So that's what an experience step means versus an actual pay step. And obviously Dan raised this earlier when there was conversation about what the pay step used to be. I mean, that 2.5%, if you're going to have that, has to be guaranteed, or you automatically create compression.
Absolutely.
And so, as long as you know that if you want to go to a scale, you just have to acknowledge we think we're going to. I mean, the 5-year forecast assumes a 2% compensation increase, so that's an assumption based on revenue projections, and we're not in a time now where we're projecting decreased revenue. So, that's different than where we were. We are at least projecting revenue neutral or increased revenue. But that's a good time probably when you're kind of coming out of a place where you were just scrambling to fill every gap to revisit the compensation philosophy. Candidly, I would say this again, you heard John say it, I don't believe we need a compensation study. I think we know what we can do. We have enough people over in HR who can give you the numbers and show you what each different scenario would look like, and then we just need to and I think we can do that, and we can make that part of a workshop, and then have what's the philosophy as we build the budget, as we get the budget finalized? Where do we want to go? None of it, I think, could happen in a tomorrow kind of way. I think it would certainly be a phased-in conversation, but I think it would be worth at least having with you all.
Anybody else have anything to add to this?
Good dialogue.
All right. I think we're finished.
Thank
then for
you.
the evening.
You're the best.
Is that it?
We're finished.
You didn't need to be.
We're adjourned.
There you go.
Excellent.
We're adjourned.